Thousands of listeners across the nation rely on Garden Variety to grow everything better. And we rely on listener support to sustain our little garden of knowledge. You can help Garden Variety flourish with a gift today. Donate now at ipr.org/donate.
This is Garden Variety, a horticulture podcast from Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I'm Charity Nebbe. Ants on your peonies are fine. Ants in your garden are mostly harmless, maybe even beneficial. But when ants take up residence in your home, well, that can be problematic. Today, we'll talk about different kinds of ants, how to decide when you have a problem, and how to deal with it when you do. We'll also talk about some of the other early season home invaders you might be encountering. Entomologist Zach Shum is here. He is an insect diagnostician with the Plant and Insect Diagnostic Clinic at Iowa State University. Hello, Zach.
Good morning.
This time of year, we sometimes hear people complaining about ants, right? Are you getting a lot of calls?
All the time this time of year. Every spring, it's like clockwork. Once the weather gets above 70 degrees for a few days in a row, that's when the ant inquiries start coming in and other early season invaders, as you were mentioning earlier. So all the rage right now.
When you get those calls, what are people usually calling about?
Usually when individuals call the Plant and Insect Diagnostic Clinic, they are seeing ants inside their home or very in close proximity to their homes. And they want to know, one, what they are, and one, what to do about them. And three, which I kind of throw in this question, should you be concerned about them in the first place? And is this something that could potentially be problematic in the house right now? Most of the time, things that we're seeing early season are scouts that are like going out and looking for food, but not necessarily things that are nesting in the house at that particular time. So those are usually the things that people are interested in and the things that I help them with.
All right. You also sometimes get calls about big ant hills in the yard as well. When somebody calls and says, I have an ant hill in my yard, what do you say?
Usually when you find larger ant mounds in a yard, they tend to be field ants, which is a particular type of ant that tends to make mounds in more open areas. So those, every ant has to be dealt with or managed in a little bit of a different way. I would argue that most you can probably ignore. Field ants, for example, they don't really pose any threat to your household or to your structure or to people or pets. But a lot of individuals find that those mounds in the yard are unsightly and they want to figure out how to get rid of the mounds or get rid of the ants. So usually I just walk people through the particular threats that ant would pose or that ant species would pose, if any. And then just walk them through that specific management strategy for whatever ant that they're dealing with. But if you're seeing big mounds, let's say like over a few inches tall in your yard, it's probably a field ant. And certainly they make smaller mounds as well.
All right. But usually not actually a problem unless they're aesthetically displeasing. And maybe that's not a real problem?
Exactly. And well, yeah. And like if I have mounds in my yard, I usually just ignore them. Nothing. I like to see ant mounds more than a yard because I'm not a yard guy. No offense to anybody listening that loves their yards. But in field ants, too, like they're harmless to houses. You can still find them coming indoors. They are out looking for food. They make it inside. They can't find their way back out very easily, or they find food, but never really are they problematic. They don't nest inside homes. They just come in either by mistake or searching for food and either don't make it back out or you just casually see them because there's a nest nearby in the yard. Things like that.
All right. And I think people who have decided to make peace with the fact that there will be ants in their yard and in their garden still don't love to see them in their homes. So when you do see ants in your home, let's walk through some triage of how to figure out if this is something to be concerned about.
Sure. And one of the first things that I ask clients when they contact me is, are you seeing a couple of ants here and there, or are you seeing trails of them walking somewhere in the house, in the kitchen, in the family room, wherever, in the basement, doesn't matter where. Typically, if you're only seeing a couple of ants here and there, let's say you collect one or two a day, or maybe just a handful of them over the course of a week, that doesn't necessarily indicate that they are feeding on anything inside the house, or if it is a type of ant that could nest inside the house, let's say carpenter ants, for example, it usually isn't a problem unless you're actively seeing trails of ants or regular activity on a daily basis that stays pretty steady or increases in severity. But most of the time when individuals contact us in the clinic, they're only seeing a couple of ants here and there. They said, hey, I found this one ant or like 3 ants in my kitchen today. What are they and what do I do to kill them? I've put out bait stations, for example, and they're not working. I still see ants every couple of days. And typically the reason why bait stations aren't working and potentially other things you're doing aren't working is because you're not actually dealing with a nest. You're just dealing with ants that are out scouting and looking for food sources. So the nest is probably somewhere outdoors for whatever kind of ant it is, but there's nothing active inside the house other than ones that are just foraging and looking for food sources. So we really have to look through, like, how many ants are you seeing? Are you seeing any trails? How frequent and heavy is that activity? Most of the time, especially early season, people are just experiencing those scouts that are out looking for food. We haven't, actually, this year we haven't had any ones that I've suspected nests are inside or in immediate proximity to the home, which is good news that that's most of what people are experiencing.
People are very concerned about carpenter ants moving into their
Sure.
home and damaging the wooden structure of a home.
Sure.
First, I mean, carpenter ants look a little different than those ants that are maybe looking for food. How do you identify a carpenter ant?
Yeah, they can look different, I'll say. Not all the time. So we often like pocket insects into these different groups. Like we have carpenter ants and we have field ants. And we have many different types of ants, but within those different groups, like there are many different species within those groups. So there are many different species of carpenter ants in the state of Iowa. There's many different types of field ants in the state of Iowa. So all of those different species obviously look somewhat different, especially once you put them under like a microscope that we have in the lab. But carpenter ants tend to be a little bit larger in size. They tend to be, individuals would look at them and say, that is a large ant. They're, up to a quarter inch, maybe even a little bit larger, depending on what caste, like is it a worker or a queen? So they tend to be a little bit larger, and that's the first thing that catches people's eyes when they see carpenter ants in the home. Beyond that, I really recommend like a professional identification. You can send pictures to the clinic. If I can't tell you confirm it's a carpenter ant from a picture, I would recommend sending a sample in to us, because even me, there are many ants that I would look at in a photo and say, I can't confirm exactly what type of ant that is. I need to put it under a microscope. But generally speaking, carpenter ants appear very large compared to most of the other ants that we see inside the homes. Their heads tend to be somewhat, I call it heart-shaped. They look very, I don't know, they look like a stereotypical large ant, but very hard. I like to see samples.
All right. And if you do have carpenter ants living in the wooden structure of your home, how dangerous is that?
Sure. And so ants, and it's important to note that carpenter ants, they don't actually eat wood. They just excavate it. So you don't have to worry about them necessarily eating the wood in your house, but they can still excavate and cause damage to wood. I do think it's a big if on the question of, are they damaging my home? Because a lot of times when we experience carpenter ants, they tend to be coming indoors, and maybe there's what we call a satellite nest indoors, but the main nest is somewhere outside. Typically, it's in an old tree stump or a tree that's been hollowed out, which is common with some maples in Iowa. And the way to manage that nest is to find the main nest and treat the nest and remove the queen. So, if you do have carpenter ants in the house, they can be treated inside the structure. Sometimes those nests are, behind walls or in attic spaces and things of that nature. There are ways to treat, and typically I recommend professionals come out if you have an active nest that is nesting inside the house, because they have a lot of tools and access to resources that homeowners can't just go and buy at the store. But there are baits that you can use, bait stations, bait gels that you can apply where you have activity, and that can help to get rid of those ant problems. But if you do have an active nest in the house, I usually recommend professionals. They have a lot of tools and resources and they have the professional expertise to actually manage them inside structures, because a lot of them tend to be hidden behind walls and things.
And I know a lot of the ant baits that you can buy, they're pretty self-contained. As someone with a lot of pets in my house, I just loathe putting
Sure.
out anything that seems poisonous in any way. But how do you feel about those for us? Maybe there's a small nest in the house. Do you feel like that's something somebody can take on themselves?
For sure. I don't think it ever hurts to attempt to use bait stations. One of the, I guess, potential issues that you can run into is different types of ants like different types of baits. So a lot of the commercially available, like if you just go to the store and get taro baits, a lot of them have more of a sweeter formulation for ants that like sweeter foods. Carpenter ants tend to, at least in my experience, like protein-based baits, which are, I guess, a little bit harder to just come across and know that you're getting a protein-based bait. So that's why identifying the ant to species is really important, because it can completely change what type of bait you need to purchase. And not all of them might be available at your local home and garden store. So, I might, and some ants even change their preference over the year. They like sweet things earlier in the season and then switch to protein-based things later in the season. So that's why identification is really important, because a lot of individuals do call and say, I put out taro baits, but the ants aren't taking it. And it's usually because either the ant that they're dealing with doesn't like that type of bait, or because they're not seeing trails and they're trying to use a bait to manage just a few ants that come in here and there. So I always say identification is always the first step to correctly dealing with an insect issue in the home.
All right. In this early season, you're also getting a lot of calls about possible clover mites or maybe even termites. What are people telling you that they're seeing?
This has been an interesting year. So we don't, at least in my experience, I've only been in Iowa this will be my third full summer. We don't really deal with a lot of termite inquiries, but oddly enough, I've gotten a lot of, when I say a lot, like maybe 4 inquiries this year of swarming termites, which are the mobile, like flying stage of termites on exterior windows, screens, some inside houses and inside garages. That's been a little bit unusual this year, but we do have termites in Iowa. The winged stage, they look kind of like a flying ant, but it's just been an odd year for termites. So if you're seeing a lot of winged insects that look something like an ant, but not quite, they have 4 uniformly sized and shaped wings. They could be potential termite swarmers, but I do want to note that if you do find them, that doesn't mean that there's an active nest in or underneath your home, but maybe there's a nest somewhere nearby that they're flying from. So when termites and ants swarm, essentially they are moving their nest to a new location because their former nest got too large and they need to spread out and disperse. So seeing winged individuals of carpenter ants, for example, other types of ants, termites, doesn't mean that you have an active issue in your house, even if you found them in your house, but could be a good reason to just look around to see if you have any activity that is more serious. Clover mites are always all the rage. We get clover mite inquiries pretty much throughout the year, every year. They tend to be a little bit worse in early to mid-spring and then again, early fall, late summer timeframe. Those are persistent and probably one of the more annoying critters that people can get into their homes, but they are nearly impossible to manage, which I'm happy to dive in more, but people contact me and they're like, I've had 5 pest control companies come out and they've sprayed, 6 different chemicals over the past 6 to 8 months and they're still here. And I'm like, yep, that's pretty normal. There's nothing you can do. There's no miracle cure. All you can do is manage them slowly over time.
Zach Shum is an insect diagnostician with the Plant and Insect Diagnostic Clinic at Iowa State University. For more gardening information and tips, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. You can find out more at iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. Garden Variety is a production of Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension. It's produced by me, Erin Stile, Caitlin Troutman, and the Iowa Public Radio talk show team. For more garden goodness, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Just go to iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. See you next time.